I love timelines, and today we're talking about the Vanderpump Rules and Valley podcast. There are so many of these, and we have a new one. So let's go back to the beginning on the first podcast and see how all of these kept popping up. In March 2015, Stassi Schroeder is the first with a podcast called Straight Up with Stassi. Stassi then paused her podcast in June 2020 after a racist incident with former castmate came to light. The podcast then came back from a hiatus in September 2022. Then Stassi rebranded the podcast from Straight Up with Stassi to Just Stassi in March 2024. Next up is Sheena Shea. She started her podcast Shenanigans in March 2018, and the podcast is still running today. Lala started the Give Them Lala with Randall podcast in January 2020, but after her and Randall split, she rebranded the podcast to just Give Them Lala in November 2021. Then in March 2021, Stassi starts a second podcast called The Good, The Bad, The Baby with her husband Beau Clark as the co-host. Kristen Doty is the next up to start a podcast with Sex, Love, and What Else Matters, which started in November 2022. Kristen then paused her podcast in December 2023 after Valley producers told her to stop sharing behind-the-scenes details. The podcast then came back in early 2024 and was renamed Balancing Act. Kristen added a co-host, her partner Luke Broderick. Rachel/Raquel Levis also started a podcast called Rachel Goes Rogue in January 2023. Rachel then ended the podcast herself in October 2024, but Rachel's publicist takes it over. The podcast then officially ended here in April 2025. Brittany Cartwright and Jax Taylor also started a podcast in March 2023 called When Reality Hits. As we know, Brittany and Jax then split up and they start to co-host opposite episodes each week so they don't have to record episodes together in the summer of 2024. But as their divorce moves forward, Brittany takes sole ownership of the podcast. Tom Sandoval is the next person to start a podcast with his Everybody Loves Tom podcast, which launched in September 2023. Tom then releases podcast episodes through April 2024. He then comes back for one episode in October 2024 to squash some rumors. Katie Maloney and Dana Cathan start their podcast Disrespectfully in January 2024. Their podcast is still running to this day. Nia and Daniel Bucco also start a podcast called Hold My Crown in April 2024. After being kicked off his own podcast, Jax Taylor starts another one, In the Mind of Jax Taylor, which he starts releasing his own episodes on a new podcast channel in March 2025. Michelle Senni also starts a podcast here in March 2025 called The Pursuit of Sassiness. Last but not least, Tom Schwartz starts a podcast called Detox Retox here in April 2025, with the first guest being his ex-wife, Katie Maloney. Curious to know if you listen to any of these podcasts from the Vanderpump Rules and Valley crew, and if any of them are worth giving a listen. And on that note, don't forget to listen to Leisha and I's podcast every week for our also episodes covering Summer House and everything else we are reading, watching, and listening to.